There we go. So we would like to have to admit one more person here. Jim Culver's coming on. We'll see if we can get him connected. And someone else who's identified by a long phone number. Well, not that long. There we go. Welcome. And welcome to Jim. Maybe we should just start with a brief introduction to Rosalys. Most of you know Rosalys Peel. She has written this book called Mike and Me, which I find to be a rather unique treatment of caregiving, because not only does she present a beautiful memoir of her caregiving for her husband, Mike, with details about their personal life and their marriage before dementia became a part of it, but she also has created a guidebook for people who are looking for specific information and suggestions about how to care for a person with dementia. So Rosales, I think I'll just turn it over to you. And if you would like to go around and ask people more questions about their personal experience, that's fine. Or you can just go right into your whatever you'd plan to say today.
Okay, so let's do that. It's really helpful if I know what your connection is to being a caregiver, and then I can be a little more direct in what we talk about. So as I look at my screen, I think I've got Kathy to my right, who I met briefly. No, it's Rachel to my right. So Rachel, do you just want to sort of mention how you're connected and what made this topic interesting to you?
So my wife of 35 years had a major stroke in 2013 and has been exhibiting signs of vascular dementia for the past 4 years. And we've had her assessed at significant cognitive impairment. She's been assessed twice now. Yeah, all the caregiver exhaustion, ups and downs. And I look forward to some new insights.
Okay, so I wrote down exhaustion. I bet a lot of people relate to that. Okay, now I see somebody in the blue sweater, and that might be Anne, if I'm not mistaken. No, who's sitting next to Rachel on the screen? We may find this difficult to tell who people are where.
We're not all in the same position, Rosalys. So,
okay. So maybe this is impossible. Let's just go for sort of a show of hands. What I do know is we have one person who's worked with hospice as a volunteer. So I've got somebody, there we go. So we've got somebody in the category of a professional, and I do know Karen Haig. Maybe you can raise your hand. I see her as a professional who, as she told me the other day, she's certainly in the role of being a caregiver for many, many people. And who else can I identify in some way? There's others I don't know about. I guess down here at the bottom, I think maybe that's my friend Kathleen that I might know from book club. She just waved. And Kathleen, do you want to speak up? What made you interested in the talk?
You'll have to unmute yourself.
You're on mute.
There we go.
Thank you.
I'm interested in the topic. My dad passed away about 4 years ago, and he had a little dementia and Parkinson's going on. My mom does not have dementia going on. She's 90 years old, so I'm pretty blessed that way. I was working with a woman at a care facility with dementia who just died on Sunday. My dog and I do therapy dog visits, so I guess that's the extent of it for me.
Right. So I think we've got quite a few people who are particularly interested in dementia. Should we just do a hand show if you're interested in dementia? Sort of that category, yeah. I don't know if we've got anybody else who, I'm wondering, is anybody dealing with at the end of life right now, terminal at the end of life, hospice level, that's somebody you're caring for? Yeah, Karen. Anybody else? Okay. Anybody else want to come up with something in particular you'd like me to quote, zoom in on topics? I had put a few things out in what you may have seen printed somewhere. The topic of, being an effective caregiver, some things that can be helpful along that line. I talked about avoiding burnout, and then I also mentioned some new information about dementia. So those were kind of the topics I mentioned. Anybody else want to throw out another topic that you want to put in there that you're particularly interested in? Okay. All right. So I'm just, and feel free, this is called open mic for a reason. So if something comes up and you want to add something or make a comment, just give me a wave and we'll find out what you're thinking about. So I just want to start off by saying one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my whole life is be a caregiver for my husband. So all of you who are in that role of being a caregiver for a loved one or in a professional level, there is not a harder job in my mind than being a caregiver. I would say it was the hardest, and I would say it was the most rewarding. And one of the things I did is I did take journal notes, which I'm so thankful for. I would encourage anybody who's inclined to do any journaling at all. When something happens that's kind of sweet, just grab that little notebook and write it down, because it's so rewarding to look back at those golden moments, and it's easy to miss them if you don't do that. So one of the hardest jobs and the most rewarding is what I would say. There's another layer right now because of COVID, and I cannot even begin to understand how complicated that must be for everybody, because I'm living COVID like we all are, but not as a caregiver. But as a caregiver, you're limited in the people who can come in and help you out. You're limited in every time you do anything, going to a doctor's appointment, shopping, getting extra help, getting extra people for transportation. So I just want to start off by saying I recognize that this is a really challenging job. And one of the things I say is important is to give appreciation. So I want to give that to you right up front. So you all deserve credit for that. So a little bit about me. I'm 78 years old. I was born in Nevada, have 2 adult children, have a nursing degree, 2-year nursing degree from a community college, Sacramento City College. Moved here 36 years ago and went back to University of Washington and got my bachelor's degree. Taught childbirth education classes at Swedish Medical Center up until 2 years ago. And had a wonderful, wonderful privilege while I was there of not only meeting lots of wonderful young couples and being involved in their birth, but also had the opportunity to get to know John Gottman. And some of you may know who John Gottman is. He's a renowned researcher on family and couple relationships. So it turned out, same time as my husband got diagnosed as Alzheimer's, I was teaching classes at Swedish and invited to help John Gottman create a program for new parents with babies. So we created a program called Bringing Baby Home, and it's all about couples relationships. So it was kind of an interesting thing that happened to me when my husband got diagnosed. I was learning about couple relationship and keeping your relationship strong. And at the same time, I was talking to new parents about children and child development. And then here comes Mike's diagnosis. And probably like all of you, I'd say I think all diagnosis, it doesn't have to just be dementia or Alzheimer's, but that one in particular really threw me off. I'd had no experience with Alzheimer's. And of course, I knew all the terrible stories about people getting lost and running away and harming you and not knowing you at the end of life. And I mean, the anger, I just was ready for all that. So I had a lot of fear, and somehow we came through it. And I can tell you honestly, Mike still knew me at the end of life, and that he never ran away, and he never hurt anybody with the car. He never stole the car keys. So all those fears I had did not happen. So there's no guarantee because every situation's different, but they did not happen. So down the road, his doctor had told me I should write about this. And I just was journaling anyway, and I took a few more notes thinking I need to tell people that there may be more to this story. But what I think was fascinating is that I had some skills that were kind of unique. And the skills were that I was able to, as Mike lost some of his skills, I was able to think about younger children and what happens because he was aging sort of backwards, his skills were going backwards. And I was able to kind of think about it in a different way. I was able to think about if we went out and ate, it didn't make sense to give him a menu for a dinner menu. That was way beyond what he could do at one point. But we could go out to lunch. And what did I do when the children were 3 or 4 and you went out to lunch? You talk about what we're going to order ahead of time, and you don't give them a menu and have them try to figure it out. Mm-hmm. So it was just something interesting that I put into play and what I wrote about in my book, so other people could perhaps find that work for them. So that came into play. But then the other one that was pretty amazing was our relationship. Because as all of you know, as caregivers, whoever you're caregiving, be it a professional or non-professional, it can strain a relationship. And so when Mike and I would bump heads, I had the tools. One very important one is to take a break. And I can honestly tell you, there was moments when I wanted him to lift his right foot and his right arm was going up. And we tried it 3 or 4 times. And then I would simply say, just a minute. And I'd walk out of the room because I couldn't deal with it anymore. I just needed to walk away and get a break. But I knew that because of the Gottman information. That's researched. You know, when you're in a stressful situation, take a break and come back to it. So I implemented all those things. And so I put those in the book with the idea that it might help others down the road. And then I had one other wonderful thing happen. I had a chance meeting with a professional author, Dan Zadra, who I'm happy to have on the cover of the book. Here's Dan's name right down here. So it says, with Dan Zadra. He started the company Compendium, so he knew how to put a book together. He was my mentor, my guide person, and really helped me figure out how to do this. So we designed the book with journal notes, stories, and insights. So anybody can just pick up the book. Really, I'm now learning as I talk to multiple groups, it applies to any caregiver situation. You can pick up the book and you can just look at the chapters. And if you want to read about touch, you can go to the insights if you don't want to read the story that goes with touch. If you want to talk about mobility, just go to the chapter with stories about mobility. So there's stories that Mike and I encountered with mobility, but go to the insights at the end of the book and find out what I learned made mobility easier. So that's how the book is set up. So that tells you a little bit about the setup for the book. Before I get into some of these other things, including some Gottman tips for effective caregiving, anybody want to add anything or jump in or focus me in another direction?
No.
Okay, you're hanging in there. All right, so I don't know. Do you want to talk about, let's say burnout. Let's say burnout. Let's talk about being an effective caregiver, okay? And then when we get to burnout, I want to find out from you what you do to not be burned out. But some of these are so typical. I mean, we all know this, but every time I give a talk like this, I get better at it. So some of these, it's like you need a poster on your refrigerator so you remind yourself every day. And here's a very simple one. Now remember, this comes from couple relationship research, not in general for caregivers, not particularly for Alzheimer's couples, but it is researched. Catch your partner doing something right and tell them about it. And we all know that. We all know that. That's the learning moment. When you tell somebody what they did right, then you get more right. So for instance, my example of Mike lifting his left arm when I want his right foot to go up. You know, what I needed to remember is not get mad that the left arm was going up when I wanted the right foot. What I needed to remember is he was working really, really hard. He was really trying to lift the right foot for me. And what I needed to say to him is, thank you, honey, you're working really hard. Good job. And then I needed to walk out of the room sometimes. But at any rate, I needed to recognize how hard he was working. And it's a very interesting thing. When you start praising people that way, it changes the culture of appreciation in your home and the people you're with. When you start saying nice things to people, it changes their mood, but it changes the feel in the environment. So that's a biggie, and we can all remember that with those we love. I think it applies to our adult children, to our friends, to other people, but in particular, it's been researched for couples. So for couples in particular. Okay, you got one of them. Let me give you another one, another research-based tip. And this is a very simple one. It's departures and reunions. And we all know that. And I'm going to take it to professional caregivers as I talk about this. And I think a lot of professional caregivers are really good about that. When they come on a shift, they go and introduce themselves to the people they're going to be working with. Hi, I'm Mary. I'm going to be with you today. You know, I'll be back in a little bit. And then at the end of the day, they do their departure. They come back in and say, just want to let you know I'm leaving now and Susan's going to take over. And if they're really thinking along the lines, what we know help, they might also add another little tip about, boy, you know, it sounds like, it would be something you saw them do. You would add something like, I'm so glad you got a call from your daughter today. Or wasn't that a great lunch you had? Or I'm glad you enjoyed your dinner. So at the end of the day, you're saying goodbye, but you're also talking about something with them. So it's real simple for couples, because couples, literally, if somebody goes to the grocery store or somebody goes somewhere, when they come back, you give them a little hug, or you just kind of greet them. And you don't forget when you go out the door to the grocery store to not say goodbye to them. You give them a little hug, you give them a little kiss and say, see you later. And when you come back, you just kind of greet them again. We all did that when we were first dating or first meeting somebody, and we can forget it later. I'll never forget, John Gottman, of course, was teaching these things, and I was sitting at a meeting. It was a long table. It was a small conference meeting up at the University of Washington. And we were putting the program together. We're designing this couple for new parents, this program. And his wife had to leave the meeting. And as she got up and walked out, she went by her husband and gave him a little hug and a peck on the cheek. He was presenting to a whole group. And as she walked out, she gave him a little hug and a little kiss on the cheek. And I thought, that's really nice. That's really, really nice. So departures and reunions, very small little thing, but I think that's a nice one to remember. And it's research-based. When I say something's research-based, these are things that they've discovered master marriages do, relationships over time. And his description, he kept telling us master relationships. And finally, we raised our hand and said, okay, so what's a master marriage? A master marriage is a marriage that moves through time and is reasonably satisfied. And we all did. We all went, just reasonably satisfied. Doesn't have to be satisfied. Just reasonably satisfied. So, you know, those are things that you do in a relationship. And as I've talked to caregivers in other situations, people really relate to that when they're providing care for people and people in their family. I'm a little better about it now. We, of course, had this no touch. Welcome. I'm a little better now, because when we had the no touch, it was really strange, because I did not have any physical touch with my grandchildren for almost 2 years. We met outside, you know, we had heaters going out there, but there was no touch at all. We were doing air hugs, but I try to do that with them too. You know, there's a greeting when they come and there's a greeting when they go. So I implement it in other ways other than just the research for couples. All right, you got two. Do you want one more?
Sure.
Oh, let's go.
Go ahead.
Let's hear some music coming in. So I'm just going to give you another one and maybe read just a little bit. Some of you, if you've heard me talk before, heard me talk about this one. This is the best medicine of all. And that's a little chapter in the book. And really what I'm talking about there, the best medicine of all is laughter. And I think there's been a lot said currently about music and how it can affect our brains and the importance of that. And we now know that laughter is a big deal. And when you are working really, really hard as a caregiver, it's hard to remember to laugh and find the lighter side and enjoy what's funny, because there are funny things that happen. Mike had such a good sense of humor. One day I was sitting at the desk and he came in. This was probably about year 6. Somebody said how many years you were into it. So his doctor said probably from diagnosis till death would be about 9 years. And it was 9.5 years. So this was probably about 6 years. He came in, I was sitting at my office and he was laughing and laughing. And he said, "This is the best one yet," because he had his underwear on backwards and he could see the humor in that. So another one that was great that he did pretty late, pulled in the driveway, and I'd always wait for him to get out and get him away from the car so I could pull into the carport. And as I was pulling in, he went, "Ow, ow, ow, ow." And I thought I'd run over him. Of course I hadn't. He was just going, "Ow, ow, ow," to play another joke on me. So if you can keep some humor as a caregiver, it's huge. And we had some wonderful people who became our circle of friends. And whenever they came to our home, the mood went up. I mean, I tried, but when you're a caregiver continually, you're not so perky. But when people come to your home, if they come with a smile and they can brighten things up a little bit, it changes the whole mood. So anyway, I'm just going to read you a little bit on this chapter. It's called The Best Medicine of All. In his 1979 bestseller, Anatomy of an Illness, Dr. Norman Cousins introduced the world to the healing power of laughter therapy. After years of pain and discouragement from a life-threatening illness, Dr. Cousins described how he finally helped heal himself by watching cartoons, Laurel and Hardy movies, and old I Love Lucy reruns. A growing body of research supports the theory that laughter is a natural medicine that can improve the quality of life for patients with chronic illnesses, such as cancer, arthritis, and yes, Alzheimer's. Among other things, laughter can relax the body and mind, boost the immune system, trigger the release of endorphins, inspire hope, diffuse anger, and promote love, optimism, and the will to live. All very important for Alzheimer's patients. Yes, and then I talk about a number of things, and I'll get into it a little bit more, what some of those care providers did for us, but I want to read you just a couple of insights from the very end of that chapter. So insight 1, I've got 3 of them here for you. The Alzheimer's Association reminds us that depression is common amongst people with Alzheimer's, especially during the early and middle stages. Could it be that a little daily laughter therapy, especially with friends and family, might be an antidote? 2, some cancer treatment centers have introduced daily laughter sessions for their patients. After a laughter session, patients have said things like, "I didn't even think about cancer while I was laughing, and that felt great." Perhaps that can work for Alzheimer's couples too. 3, an article in the New York Times features a group called Nurses for Laughter at Oregon Health Science University. The nurses all wear buttons that say, "Warning, humor may be hazardous to your illness." I think that's a good affirmation and reminder for Alzheimer's couples too. Okay, I'm going to put Kathleen. Maybe she moved away. Hi, Kathleen. Are you willing just to share that little story about taking a pet into a care facility and how you can see a difference with people with a pet? Oh, your mic might be off. Kathleen's in my book club group, and she shared that with us a few weeks ago. So I didn't know she'd be here, but I'm really happy she is. Just the pet, and I'm thinking it's a variable of that thing of laughter.
Well, bringing my dog in just kind of broke the ice, and it gave her something to talk about because she would remember things from before so well. And she had a dog that she loved, whose name was Molly, and she would tell me all about Molly, and that was really sweet. Because it would just take her back, and she loved to touch my dog. My
Yes.
dog is real soft and curly, furry dog, so she touched him a lot. When she was at the end, when she was on hospice and in her bed and not very responsive, I put Rufus, who was kind of squirrely and whiny, and so it took a while for him to calm down because he wasn't used to seeing her like flat on her back in bed and not, doing much of anything. But when he was ready, I put her in the bed, just beside her, and I lifted up her hand and I put it on his back, and she smiled, and that was the most response I had gotten from her all day. And her smile was so beautiful, and it was frozen. She just smiled, and then she just stayed that way for like minutes. And even after we left, I think she was still in that smile. So that was really, it was bittersweet.
It's
So
just sort of the reminder of sight, sound, touch, all those things. So laughter is kind of where I took it, but then that touch and reminder of stories are really, really lovely. Anybody else have anything like that you want to add? A moment of laughter, or sometime when you have somebody come into your home and it lifts the mood? Yes.
I don't have that laughter thing, but because you brought up the Gottman Institute, I just wanted to mention I'm a full-time caregiver, and I have subscribed to their newsletter, which is a Marriage Minute. And so once a week, they just give simple ideas, short stories, reminders, and I find it's really helpful to keep my attitude positive. And I just really appreciate it. So because you brought up his research, I just want to also affirm, I think that's as a caregiver, I find that really helps. And I'm looking, for example, a couple of last ones, like an appreciation activity, 22 date ideas. And so, and they're real simple things, but it's like, oh, we could do that. We could do something fun. And anyway, just thought I'd mention that.
Remind me the name of the newsletter again.
It's called Marriage Minute. And
Right.
if you go to the Gottman Institute website, it's there, sign up for this free newsletter kind of thing.
Excellent. I will do that. Really nice. I didn't know they had that out there. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're moving on. I'm just going to add something else. This doesn't quite fall into the Gottman stuff, but I just want to mention this as far as other things that may make a real difference as a caregiver, and that's sleep. That's not easy. There's lots of studies are out there. One of them that recently came out in the Alzheimer's newsletter was talking about less than 6 hours may have a higher risk of developing dementia. So 6 hours of sleep a night. And when I wrote about that in my book, I related it to younger children and Mike needing more sleep as some of his cognitive skills changed. So it was interesting how I discovered I needed to add more naps, just as you would for a younger person. His brain was working so hard to do the things he did that once we added extra naps, then it was easier for him to function. And the studies are very, very clear now that when you sleep, it helps get rid of some of the amyloids in your brain, which is one of the factors that are affecting dementia. So if you can build in a few more naps or a few more rests, then it makes it easier to function. And I will say, I set my phone for 20 minutes and I took a little nap from 2:45 till about 20 after 3 today. But not quite that late. I'd set it for 3:15. But I just knew that, I'm coming into 4 o'clock. I want to be with it. I drank my glass of water and I gave myself a 30-minute rest. So we all can use that for our brains. So that was just one more. And there's a little chapter written about that as well. And then another little hint on this being effective caregivers is just a reminder. Somebody told me this early on, and it was such good advice. Keep things as normal as possible, as long as possible. So as normal as possible, as long as possible. So that meant everything. That meant that we tried to continue at that time in particular, tried to get to church as much as possible. If people wanted to come and visit us, I tried to make that work out as long as possible. We just did not get rid of things before it was time to get rid of them. It's so easy for your head to go a little crazy and start dropping things because you're afraid what's going to happen. The doctor's the one who gave us the word when it was time for Mike to stop driving. And that was probably one of the bigger, more challenging conversations. And matter of fact, how that worked out is she said that it was probably time for him to stop driving. And I guess I should go back. When he first got the diagnosis, University of Washington said he should stop driving because he had the diagnosis now. So then when we settled into his doctor, Dr. Zhang, she did not say that to him right away. So when the UW said it, his perspective was, I was fine before I walked into this office, I'm still fine. So somewhere along the way, what I did is I went to the Alzheimer's Association as a resource, and they were incredible. And they suggested that we have a third party help make that decision. So a friend would make sure that they rode with him once a month to kind of help assess the driving. So that's one of the ways we worked out. There's lots of ways to do that. But that was one of those that we were really at loggerheads for quite a while. We really couldn't even discuss it. We needed to just kind of take a break. And I had to step back and let somebody else talk to Mike about that. So that's one of the things that can happen as well. Okay, so keep things as normal as possible. I referred to take a break. Has anybody else put that in your life? That you just find sometimes you're overwhelmed and you need to just sort of walk away and take a break and then come back to it later. I'm trying to think of a good example with that other than I mentioned the foot and lifting the foot. I would say there were times where Mike, I'm going to say, kind of lost it, you know, just kind of arms up in the air and getting tense. And I was able to, at that point, put my arms around him from the side and just talk to him and calm him down. And that was helpful. So that was kind of a way of taking a break. Just stop the behavior. If we were trying to work on a shower, trying to work on getting dressed, just literally put my arms around him for a little bit, let him know everything would be okay, and just stop the behavior for a while. Okay, so anybody want to add any other wonderful things that you know about caregiving that have made a big difference? Not the burnout part, because that's a whole different thing, thinking about yourself and how you stay, you know, healthy and not get burned out. Any other tips that you know as a caregiver? I like the one that you mentioned about you have a website that you can go to, you get marriage tips right along the way as you go through it. That's huge. Any other little things that you can think of that help your relationship with the person you're caring for? Okay, so what about burnout? I'm curious, is anybody in a support group? Aha. Okay, so Rachel, what have you found for a support group?
This one.
Okay, oh, coming to this one. So Fridays, the first Friday of the month, absolutely. Karen, you put your hand up. You want to share what you do to give yourself some support? When you're giving out to so many people, you've got to find a place you can get renewed.
Yeah, I'm involved in a couple of clergy colleague groups, and I connect with two of my seminary classmates pretty frequently, and just to sort of share stories and remember that we're human, and a lot of it is that it's just really okay to have the great big giant feelings you have. You know, it's good to have them at home rather than at church, but
yes,
but it's good to have them.
Well, and it's really nice to share it with another group that knows what that's about, because you have things in common, you know. And I really put off going to a support group. I really did not want to do that for all kinds of reasons, but I'll read you just a little bit about some of my hesitations. But I just, I just didn't want to do a support group. Let me see if I can find it here. Here we go. I'll just read you a little paragraph here in this chapter. It's called Good Reasons to Join a Support Group. Midway in Mike's disease, various people started telling me that I should attend a support group. While it sounded like a reasonable advice, I could always find good reasons to ignore it, including I was hesitant to talk with strangers about my problems. I was reluctant to share my inner feelings and sadness with others, and I definitely did not want to talk about Mike behind his back. Besides, there was also the problem of the location and time of day, and who could stay with Mike while I was with a support group? It all seemed overwhelming, so I just put it off as long as possible. As time went on and caring for Mike became more difficult, I realized that I simply had to have a safe place to vent. I knew I needed to be with people who truly understood what this was all about, what it's like to care for someone 24/7. Now I was ready for a support group, but was there a good group that was ready for me? So that was my introduction, and I did put it off. I probably should have found a group a couple of years before. Anybody have a group you can recommend? There's this group on Fridays. Anybody want to throw out friends or family that you're using in that way? Any other suggestions?
Well, there is another support group at Grace called Compassionate Caring that meets on Friday mornings on Zoom. And it's not specifically for caregivers, but there are caregivers in that group. And it's open to people outside of Grace. So if you're interested in getting the Zoom or being on the email list for that, just let me know.
Excellent.
And we know that IVC has a caregiver support group. I think, does anyone know if they're still doing that even?
That's who I used, which is volunteer caregivers. I'm trying to think of the right letters for that. Interfaith volunteer caregivers.
Yeah, they call it Island Volunteer Caregivers now, but yes.
And it was Karen Carson who was doing it. And last I knew, she was still doing it. And she was just absolutely wonderful. And what was interesting to me, I worked pretty hard to find a group with people who were dealing with dementia. And it really wasn't necessary to be with a dementia group, because every caregiver is dealing with the same things. And so everybody was understanding and appreciative. And I've heard some people say they didn't want to go to a group and then feel burdened with other people's problems. I would say I did not go away with that feeling. I just felt like people understood how complicated and hard it was to be a caregiver. I think there's also a group for Alzheimer's. There was an Alzheimer's person from the Alzheimer's Association who had a support group on the island, but I don't know too much about that. Okay, no other resources here, huh? But that's a good one at Grace. We can remember that one.
I'll just make a comment. My situation was different because my husband had a stroke, and it was what I'm relating to is how he had such significant cognitive changes for a shorter period of time than somebody with Alzheimer's. But one of the things that happened to me in terms of support was that my sister came to be with me. And when we would get David settled down, we thought most evenings, she and I would sit and just chat and talk about the day. And that was so grounding for me that after he died, she said, well, I hope we're not going to give this up, this chit chat. And I said, no, I don't want to give it up either. And he has been gone now for a couple of years, and we still talk to one another every single night.
That is
And it
so
has been
nice.
So one of the things for me is that, and it was particularly true after he died, I could feel this time of day getting a little bit like, oh boy, this is going to be a long evening. And then I'd say, oh no, I'm going to have that chat with my sis. And it continues to be a very helpful thing. So
that's really a nice thing. It happens to be one of the things that they talk about with the Gottman research, a daily stress reducing conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that you kept that, because that can be one of the things that feels like a great loss when you lose your partner, and you were able to keep that, that's a big deal. I was able to keep that during Mike's illness. And so it's one of the things I frequently talk about, a daily stress reducing conversation. So that never went away, even in the last weeks when he could not speak and he was not, most people would think he wasn't there. I had my conversations with him, and by talking to him, it eased things for me as well, to just talk about our day and what had happened and I'm glad this happened or that happened. A little bit like I said, a caregiver could do at the end of the day if you were in a care facility. And so if your loved one ends up in a care facility, I shouldn't say ends up, if a loved one of yours, the best option is to have them in a care facility. Remember, you can do that when you go visit them. You can make a conscious effort of having a phone call in the evening or sometime when you touch base on a regular basis. That's a real nice one, Fran. It's nice to see you. We go
Thank you,
way
Rosales.
back
Yes,
a long time ago.
exactly.
And I know some people who feel very close and connected to you. That's the Hadley family. So that's Sam, Mary,
you.
and Lang, and yeah,
Yeah, thank
nice
you.
to see you.
You as well.
So anybody else? That was a nice add-on. Okay, so support groups we talked about, and then I think you may have done it, but just make it a little clear in your own mind. You really can't do this alone. You need a circle. And, some people call it a team. I call it a circle. And it's kind of nice to know how the circle's building. You may not even know you've got a circle because it comes from all different places, like sisters. I had sisters who became part of my circle. It can be the neighbor next door. I like to tell the story of, some of you may know Signe Quixland. Gary and Linda Quixland Whitehead is her last name. And Signe was probably, young, maybe early teens. And at the point that Mike was in bed and napping a little bit more, then it was such a treat if Signe would just come over and sit in the room with him. She could read or do something because Mike was taking a rest. But what it meant for me, I could be in the yard. And I knew Signe would let me know if he woke up or needed anything. But otherwise, I couldn't even leave the house. And so here's a young person who can do a little something for me. She felt proud of what she did. She was happy to do it. And what a huge gift it was for me. So look around if you're in this position and figure out where you can pull some extra help. We had one couple early on, and this is an incredible gift. Early on, they just said, well, we'd like to have Mike come over one day a week. And that was like, oh my, a set invitation of one day a week. So in fact, I did continue teaching at Swedish one day a week. And he would go to Stan and Audrey's, and then my daughter would pick him up after work, get him home, they'd have dinner, and then I'd come home from work. And so one of the things I kept for me was one day a week for work. I cut back with all the classes, but I kept one day. And that was, that was a big deal and a big treat for me. Take that ferry ride over, be with young couples, take the ferry ride back. Later, when that got too complicated, we found another resource, which was a friend of my daughter's, not a professional caregiver, but a young mother with young children. And that was Stephanie. And Stephanie then picked up that slack when it was better for Mike not to leave the house. And then eventually, the last 8 months, we hired a professional caregiver. About the same time that hospice came in, I had a professional caregiver one day a week. So hard to do that, really hard to say, I'm going to walk away and let somebody else do this for the day. And I could only tell you, I probably waited too long. We hit August about the same time that hospice came in. And my son had a job on the East Coast. My daughter had a young baby, 6 months old, and both of them said, we can't do this anymore. And it was like, whoa, I'd lost the family members, which I'd probably been counting on too much too long. And then I got some more people in place. So I don't know, you want to share some of your resources? Anybody have any resources? I think Kathy's sitting next to Drusy, her neighbor.
I can tell you that I'm lucky enough to have my son on the island.
Yes.
And that's my resource. And he being young has introduced me to some people to talk about it and share. And actually living here where we live, there's a lot of people that believe in, aging here at home, and they have been very supportive.
Tell her that.
Good. Okay, we do have volunteer caregivers through IVC as well, but
I did call them, but it's unfortunate this COVID has put a giant kind of crimp on a lot of things. I've had people that agree to come over and then change their minds, and it's a little bit more difficult. I don't want to use that as an excuse, because I have been trying, but it is very difficult in that respect.
Absolutely, absolutely. Huge. Okay, so then anything you want to add that you did as far as just you? Do people get walks? Anybody doing any exercise? Is this fitting in your life? Time for a cup of tea with a friend? Yes, go ahead, Patty.
She's talking to somebody.
Exercise for sure makes all the difference. You mentioned getting outside. There's something about just going for a walk, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour, just helps me change gears. Critical for my mental health.
Really helpful, really helpful. Anybody else want to add anything that you're doing for yourself? Okay, I discovered that I did not give up book club. That was a big deal. I planned on it. I said I would give up book club. And then one of the members said her husband could come over, and her husband knew my husband. And she said, oh, you know, Art can come over and stay with Mike. And it was like, oh, so we would go to book club together, and her husband would come and stay with Mike, and I would go to book club. And that was a once a month get together with other women and talk about a book. And I had a commitment of reading a book once a month. So that was a real nice thing I did not get rid of. So when I say keep things as normal as possible, as long as possible, I'm thinking for the person with dementia, but I'm also thinking for you. You know, what are the things that make your life a little bit better? I learned how to have a meal out by myself. That was kind of a big deal. I knew how to go to Blackbird Bakery and have a cup of tea, but to actually go out and just order lunch and sit by myself. And of course, it's different again with COVID, but I just learned it was okay to do that. I had been eating meals with my husband for 45 years. So that was a little different to just say I could go out and do this by myself. I mentioned journaling to you before, and I will say I haven't done a lot of journaling since Mike passed away. And I didn't say this, but he's been gone 10 years, which is pretty incredible. Those years slip by. Pretty amazing.
That's incredible.
So it is incredible. So he was diagnosed 2002, died in 2011. And then I didn't do anything on the book for 3 years. Took 3 years to write the book. And then it's been out 3 years now. So it came out in 2018.
Wow.
So yeah, it is amazing. It is amazing. But I did discover after he passed away, a little bit like you had those nightly phone calls with your sister, which were so helpful. I so missed talking to him. I just missed him. And I did have sisters. I did have a few support people. Didn't have that nice nightly phone call. And I found that when I could journal, I was frequently writing to Mike, and that helped. That helped. So do whatever works for you, whatever makes life a little bit easier.
I'm wondering, does anybody who's caregiving now have go along with the memories that are old with your person? I found that with my patients that I would see, that if I engaged with them about things that happened when they were children, they were delighted and loved me about it. And it was always new for them to tell me about it, no matter how many times they had told me about it before. It was always delightful for me to hear it and for them to tell it.
Anybody want to add to that?
I think it's true. My mother had dementia, and of course this was years ago, and so there was not a lot of research. There was not a lot of information, and I can remember, much to my father's chagrin, they had been married 56 years. The last year of her life was in nursing home care, and it was because she was wandering even in the night. So my father and mother would be asleep, and he would wake up at 6 a.m. thinking she was still asleep in their darkened bedroom, and she had actually gone out of the apartment. And so this happens couple of times. And, you know, I said to my father, I had 2 young boys, and I said, you know, we just we cannot care for mom at home. And it was one of the hardest things. So the last year of her life, she was in care, but it was wonderful because talking about those early memories, there was a concert for Christmas. And at the end, everybody was singing Christmas carols together. My mom was word perfect. I don't think she knew I was her daughter, but she knew all the words from the carols. So I think that's the thing, is being able to, I remember even that last year of her life, I would go, you know, about 3 times a week and have tea with her. And oftentimes she didn't know me, but if we talked about old poems, things that she knew as a child, that would please her. And so that's really what we have to do, is find that comfort level.
I think you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you mentioned it, Anne, and that Drusy added to it. And sometimes having a prop can help you with that, a scrapbook or a photo of the family members at a certain time. If you bring something in, it sort of helps you out if you're trying to carry a conversation. One friend would always bring a newspaper and just kind of read something in the newspaper, something to physically share or jog a memory. Yeah, that's a really good one. The other thing I wanted to say, as you know or may know, part of the book was the fact that we were able to stay home till the end of life. But I very clearly say throughout it, I never knew if we were going to continue or not. It was always out there that we might have to make a change. And the bottom line, was it safe for Mike and was it safe for me? So Drusy's example was perfect. It was no longer safe for her mother, and that's the deciding factor. It wasn't safe for her mother, and they needed to make that change. So there's just exhaustion and fatigue, and you can't do it, but there's also a safety factor involved.
Yeah.
Yes, Shannon.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Thanks so much for coming and speaking with us. I had a dear friend whose mom became demented, and they were married to a military guy who was like an admiral of such and such. And so he couldn't tolerate that his wife was different. And there was a real mismatch between his expectations and what she was actually able to do. And in order to keep his wife sharp, though, he would ask her a million questions. So take a picture like this and show the family. So who's this? Who's this? Who's this? Remember this. And as he asked more and more questions, of course, she didn't know the answers. And so there was a devaluing of her confidence and her capacity. And even a question like, well, do you want peanut butter or tuna fish? Was too much. Do you want coffee or tea? So now she's thinking, well, do I like coffee or do I like tea? And do I like milk and sugar with that, or do I just take it black? So she didn't know. And so you could see her gradually becoming more and more flummoxed. And so I talked to Chuck, and I had heard about contented dementia. I'm sure you're familiar with that. I love that paradigm of caring for people. And basically there's like 3 or 4 golden rules about it. But one is, don't ask questions. Don't say, how are you doing today? Because people don't know, but just say, oh, you're looking good today, Molly, whatever it would be. And instead of saying, well, do you want to go for a walk? You would say, hey, this is a good day to go for a walk. And I liked Anne's question, coming back to the old memories, because that was another thing that they taught quite a bit, which is if somebody feels like they are in Paris at a small cafe, then just go with it. You do not need to say, no, it's not 1947. It's actually 2022. And our wish is that they could be with us in this day and at this time when we're caring for people. And what needs to happen probably more fruitfully and more lovingly actually is that we join them wherever they are. And that no matter where they are, we say yes to that. So if somebody wants to talk about something, you can say yes and rather than yes but. That's a huge, and this is not just demented, this is how we care for anybody in our communication, how we how we listen. And the other thing they teach very commonly is listen to the expert. So I have loved your examples because you're saying you paid attention to Mike. You took the oxygen mask yourself before you gave him oxygen mask. And this is such key teaching about how to love him so deeply. And it's hard. But when if we let go of our expectations that they're going to be different and just take them exactly as they are, it does lead you to a more contented place, and it's respectful and loving and lovely for however long that can be. So
Really lovely, Shannon. I think that's just a really nice summary of that whole approach, which I endorse. I'll add one little thing to it, and I'm looking at our time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and kind of do a little summary here in a minute so people can go off if you need to, and then I'm happy staying on. And I saw somebody new come on, Stephanie, who was one of those key people that was so helpful for me with Mike. She was that young friend I referred to that was a friend of my daughter's. So she jumped in and helped us out a lot. So I want to endorse everything Shannon said, and then just put a little asterisk, which is there's that little line of lying to your loved one. So how do you do what she's suggesting, which I think is very good approach. And then the little part of, do you lie to your loved one? So I actually wrote a chapter on that because, you know, and our example was when Mike thought his father was still alive. We were going to Montana and he talked about his dad being there. Well, his dad had been gone 30 years. And so what did I do with that? Did I go along with that to keep him in that comfortable spot? Or did I do something different with it? So I think that's a great topic for another time because it's a big topic. You know, how do you keep them content and how do you handle that respect and appreciation? And so for me, that was a real challenge because I had never lied to Mike. And how do I put those two together? So I came up with what worked for us, and that's just a bigger conversation. But basically, I think the concept of having that comfort and being where they are is a valuable point. Okay, so I love these conversations. Go ahead, Anne.
I just want to tell you guys that hospice offers one of the things volunteers do is they provide respite care for caregivers. And we would have 4 hours that once a week that we would go in and allow the caregivers to get away, as you were talking about.
Huge.
And it's huge. And if you are with hospice and nobody's recommended it to you, please ask for it because volunteers are happy to do it. And although we have to wear masks and face shields to go into the homes, we can still do that.
Great. Okay, so because we're running out of time here, I'm just going to kind of finish up just a little bit. And then, like I said, I'm happy to stay on, and I would love Stephanie to add anything at the end if she's up for that. So I just want to say there's a lot of money, and most of you are coming from that perspective of some dementia going on. That seems to be the category we're dealing with today. So there is a lot of money going into Alzheimer's research. So when you do things with the Alzheimer's Association, primarily it's research-based, and there's research going on around the world because the numbers are staggering. We're all dealing with COVID right now, but this hidden one that's out there is dementia. So there's a lot of work that's going on. Just a couple of new things. There was an article that came through from the Alzheimer's Association recently, and it had to do with cataract surgery, that they're finding, in fact, getting cataracts taken care of helps the brain operate better. So that was just fascinating that, you know, and you can kind of see how the eye and having that correction could make a difference to your brain. So that was new. One I heard about a while ago and haven't had an update on, they anticipate there will be a blood test so we can get tested for Alzheimer's with a blood test, which will be really helpful because it would be like getting your cholesterol tested. If you have high cholesterol, you take medication and you deal with it. You get your blood tested and you can see you've got some building up of plaques in your brain or, you know, some amyloids building up, and they start you on medication early. And some of the medications they're discovering can slow the process. So that's very, very helpful that that'll come on board. The drug that came out recently that people were talking about, it's got some problems if you've read about it. One is it has to be administered IV and it's very expensive. Fascinating. I did have an opportunity to talk to the research people, one of the research teams that was involved in that. That was in Spokane. And when I spoke to them, the results hadn't come out yet, but they did have a comparison group, those who were in the study receiving the medication and those who were not. But what struck me about that group of people is all of them were doing lifestyle changes, because we know lifestyle changes make a difference. So that group was so inspirational to me, because there were people there who'd lived with dementia for 14, 15 years. Pretty incredible. So the things we know that make a difference, exercise is big. Of all the things, exercise is right at the top of the list. It's just like our heart. We know that it's beneficial for the heart. It's also beneficial for the brain. When you exercise, it increases circulation to the brain. So walking, exercise is big. Social, you all get it because you're here today. You know, being out and connected to others, that's good for our brain. Our brain likes to learn. And so being involved with others is important. Diet, they talk about a Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet is 8 to 11 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. I can't make it, guys. I try. So I kind of at the end of the day like to think about how many fruits and vegetables. If I count an apple as 2, or, you know, if I really push it, I can say I get to 7 and 8. But 8 to 11 is a lot. There was another study that came through. I'm on the Nurses Health Study, NIH. I've been in there for years. And that research says 5. So that in general, that we should have 5 fruits and vegetables a day. Mediterranean is much higher. They talk about Mediterranean for preventing all, not preventing, but, you know, slowing the process. Sleep is not one they've been doing like their top ones. Sleep is just now starting to come in there because the research is so clear. And then cognitive is what we've heard about for years. That's the crossword puzzle stuff, you know, so your brain has to work at some of these things. So those are the ones that they talk about as far as what we can do right now. And it is really, really helpful. There's a number of studies out there that are really looking good. And if they can do that early diagnosis and medication, that will make a difference as well. So the last thing I want to do right now is I just want to read you this one little section here, which is, let me find it here. It's just a little nice one to close on for all of us. It's called Never Give Up on Your Loved One. So I think this applies for caregiving and other situations. Just a couple of paragraphs. In the early years of his illness, Mike showed his appreciation with a sincere thank you, a hand pat, a little smile, or a loving look that could make your eyes water. But even towards the very end, there were always little signs that he still loved me and was still with me. A calculated movement of his lips, a lingering look, a little smile we shared of a past memory, a raised brow, a wrinkle between his eyes when he was concerned for me, a smile of pleasure about something I did, or a little pucker of his lips for a kiss. Yes, love adds a special meaning to the eyes. To stay connected with Mike, all I had to do was watch carefully for these little heartfelt signs, respond to them, and never disregard them. So as time goes on, never give up on your loved one and always treat him or her with dignity. Just because your loved one can no longer communicate as clearly as before, don't assume that they are not right there with you, taking everything in. It is our job to be open to them and love them just as when they could respond more fully and naturally in their pre-Alzheimer's days. So that's a good one to end on because it's easy to forget all those ways that people stay connected to us. So anybody have any closing thoughts? Hopefully you're going away with a few more things that you can do to give yourself breaks as a caregiver. And thanks to those who gave us some added ones, that was great. And hopefully things that you can do to save yourself from getting burned out. You heard a couple of readings, and I'll just hold up my book again. I noticed Flora got one of my early books. That was before we'd won a gold medal. So we're pretty proud of that. that we've got a medal on it. So she's got the book, and the medal came on a little bit after she got that book.
Oh,
So
great.
I'm happy with that. Yeah. And it is available at Plums on the Island, signed copies, and at Eagle Harbor Books, and of course, Amazon. If you look for the web page or anything, there's another Mike and Me out there. So if you look at the web page, it's Mike and Me Book, and you'll find the web page or the Facebook page under book, Mike and Me Book. Okay, anything else anybody wants to add? I loved your input. You were great. It's so fun to talk to a group when people share information too.
Well, Rosales, we can't thank you enough for the wonderful presentation you've given. You were so informative and so spirited.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to thank every one of you who came today, and whether you offered anything or not, we're just really happy to have you come and be with us. And for those who, some people had to leave already, we're grateful to them as well.
Nice group you've got going, Flory, and I'll just stay on if anybody wants to stick around.
Okay, that's great. I'll keep the meeting going. Anyone who'd like to stick around, please do. You can ask questions or share some of your experiences.
Bye, Rachel. Bye, Kathleen.
Hi, thank you very much.
Bye, Shannon. I can now see people's faces, which is great.
I want to make one comment either.
Kathy, do you want to stay on at all?
She wants to say something
I
else.
want to say something to you. I've read your book. I'm going to have to start and read it over, I think. I'm having difficulty with my future caregiver. If you know what I mean.
I do. This is a wonderful person, and I know him.
Yes, I know you know him. I don't think you know him as well as I do.
No. Whoops, we lost our mic. Can we get back on, Drusy? The mic is off for you, Kathy. Can't hear you. We've got the mic off. We can't hear you. Button must have gotten pushed. Maybe the plug came out.
Maybe so. I think I'll stop the recording now. We can keep online until they get back on with us.
Yeah.